have a very short agenda, one item, and it's some training. But regardless, I'd like to open up for public comment on all items. I'd like to remind everybody that this is the time to comment on any matter, agenda or non-agenda matters that falls within the scope of the Billings City Council. The rules are you'll be limited to 3 minutes. Please no applause, boos, or any comments from the gallery. This is an opportunity to encourage free speech to the council. And you may speak only once on each item. So if there's any public comment, please come forward.
Can I just let you guys know I'm here, but I'm not on the Zoom screen because IT's having some problems with me logging in. So just if anybody's out there in TV land.
Councilman Nicholson, are you out there? Any public comment? Well, seeing none, I'm going to ask City Administrator Kukulski to introduce our speaker.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. So as everyone's well aware, we've done, I think we're maybe on our 6th orientation session where we meet each Monday morning, 8 to 10, going through various components of the overall organization. In one of our first conversations, it was strongly supported, and it was something we were already thinking about staff-wise, so we were really on the same page of the value of having Dan Clark come. Dan is with the Local Government Center out of Montana State University, and he offers training throughout the state for local governments, and it's great to have somewhat an independent voice here, communicating, helping you to understand statutes relative to governance, local government, and things of that nature. So that's what we're scheduled to do tonight. Dan was here earlier today. Actually, we've got him here for a couple days. When we bring him to town, I think he's doing 6 or 8 or 10 ethics training sessions with our staff. So we started those today. Those will continue tomorrow. This afternoon, all the board members that you guys appoint were offered an opportunity to train with Dan this afternoon, and then he'll do this work with us tonight. So that is our agenda item, is for Dan to share with us and us to have a dialogue with him about governance and statutes and things of that nature. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan, the once upon a time illustrious mayor of the great city of Choteau, Montana, which from my earliest days in Montana, not knowing anything about our fine state 27 years ago, I thought, why isn't Choteau and Dillon and Ennis and a few other communities popped like some towns we could name? I think that'll happen sometime in the next upcoming decades. But anyways, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kukulski. And Mayor, thank you for the invitation to be before you today. As said, with the Local Government Center, we do a lot of training around the state. I've been in this director's role for about 18 years. I've been working off and on, over the years with the city of Billings, along with many of the other, both metro and rural cities, as well as counties around the state. I want to have this evening's conversation be more of a conversation. I like to use flip charts and handouts rather than a PowerPoint. I don't know if I need to say you're welcome, but if you appreciate the fact we're not using a PowerPoint, you're welcome. Some of you might argue that, boy, if Dan had a PowerPoint, he might stay a little more focused, get through this agenda. So I think what might be helpful, I guess I could start out by having you think about what it is you want to make sure we cover over the next couple of hours or hour and a half or so. I know some of you are new to both local government and to this role. And so I'm happy to, and I'm planning to talk about, just how do we create good policy? What goes into, or a framework for making good policy? So I want to talk about that. I want to talk a little bit about the city of Billings' power, form, and plan, and how that sets you apart. You're one of 36 other municipalities that operate with this structure of government and 4 counties that operate with similar structure of government. So we can talk about that and how that provides you a greater decision space than most other municipalities and counties in the state. So I can talk about that. And what was the other thing I was going to talk about? Also touch on the code of ethics if you want. I've been doing that all day. I did put in your packet. I each gave each of you a packet, and in there you'll find some of the materials we can cover today. I'm also happy to discuss with you, particularly for the folks that are kind of joining the commission or the council. We can talk about open meetings laws and some of those things that, we want to make sure that we're complying with the law and the Constitution, right? No one wants to be in your role and violate the public's constitutional rights, but understanding where's the line and what are the limits and what's that space we need to be occupying so that we're both being effective in our role as in governing, but also honoring and respecting the constitutional rights of the people to participate, to know what's going on in that arena. So with that said, those are some of the things I'm interested in covering with you today. Is there anything in particular you would like to make sure we touch on as we go that we're going to touch on today? I'm happy to talk about it if you want to.
Okay, I'll throw out property rights when it comes to the quasi-judicial things that we need to hear here.
Okay, so we can talk about
So I guess ex parte is a subset of quasi judicial.
Maybe some of our self-governing and the issues that have come up with the legislature and our charter.
Committees and open government transparency and how we navigate that. With committees under, our committees.
The clerk is asking you to please make sure you talk into your mic. So it was blending in, Mr. Pittman, with your dark shirt. So she was convinced maybe you hid it somewhere, but I see. There you go.
So I'm concerned about where the lines are authority-wise between the legislature and the city, and where it seem to be aware that the state legislature feels it is within their rights to order a lot of put a lot of constraints on city government, and I'd like to know where that ends, where they're going to go too far, what rights we have.
here for some helpful conversation. It was on and that turned off. Okay. Am I now?
Now
Okay.
it's picking up.
I hit it, but maybe. Okay. We're
Think
good.
about your favorite rock star.
Oh,
Look at
you
there.
want me to sing in this? All right.
You got it.
Is this good now? Woo. Okay. Stand back here. It was. I need to shine. All right. So I like to have this conversation. It's foundational for you when you understand and put into perspective, why do we create local government? And once you start with that conversation, then it's easier to understand why we have open meeting laws, why we have citizen participation laws, why we have all these expectations placed on government that sometimes can feel like a constraint to our ability to govern. And I think if we can appreciate at least the genesis and purpose of local government, then it puts those things in the context. It makes it less resistance on your part to engage in the governing process. So I will ask you all, feel free, I guess, Mayor, if it's okay with you, we'll just have a kind of an open discussion, but I wanted you to think about and respond to the question, why do we create local government? We've been doing it for thousands of years. It's something we do all over the world. Why do we create local government? There's lots of answers to that question, so.
So the maxim that's been often repeated is that the more local the government is, the better it is. So people here know about the particular issues that are not relevant to some larger body.
Okay, so it's more intimate, right? You're living in the place that you're governing, right? So they talk about governing locals more relevant. Yes, and why else?
I was thinking about the issue of taking on things that are in the public interest locally. So like garbage, streets, things that collectively a community needs, but are in the public interest versus private enterprise.
Yes. Yes, and oftentimes the private enterprise isn't interested in doing it. There's just not an interest there. And so it's the things that we do collectively, but there's certain things that make sense for us to do collectively rather than individually. Right, so you put those services in there: water, sewer, garbage, streets and street maintenance, parks, right? It makes sense for us to do that collectively. Now, spinning off of that, and did you have another thought?
Yeah, I think it's provide basically the health and safety and the welfare of the citizens, of the local citizens. So you're using local people to produce policies that that benefit those locally and understand the local residents.
Yeah. And that kind of puts a framework around the structure of government too: health, safety, and welfare. That those are the actual words that are used in the Montana Code Annotated that gives the purpose for local government, or at least municipal government. This is what you're to do: health, safety, and welfare. And in that, it provides powers and authorities that you have to exercise in that arena of health, safety, and welfare, which can in places be expansively defined and sometimes narrowly defined. And that's in this relationship with the legislature where they might provide that framework for you or make it more expansive. And spinning off of the idea of we've got these services, right? So this idea that we pool our resources together to provide these essential services. And when we talk about pooling our resources, think taxes, fees, and assessments, right? So the people are saying it's better for this an entity like a city to provide garbage collection than it is for me to burn it in my backyard, or to provide water than me having a well or a pit toilet in my backyard versus having a sewer system. So we pool our resources together. We elect local people to facilitate the conversation, the public's discourse on the level of services we want and how much we're willing to pay for it. So that's where a lot of your time is going to be spent trying to find that balance. So if you look in your packet, I think I have a handout in there that has a bunch of circles on it. And at the very colorful. So at the bottom there, it's with what I often will explain is you're at the fulcrum of trying to balance the community's interests, right? So you've gone through this, and we'll use this because it's a good example, is an urban chicken ordinance. I don't know of a municipality in this state where the city council, on their own volition, said, let's talk about urban chickens. No one's inviting that chaos, right? It's usually coming to you through public comment, say, hey, we have an ordinance been on the books for 80 years that excludes chickens, along with cows and horses and sheep and goats and the whole lot, right? All those farm critters. The idea was it's a model ordinance. It was passed by just about every municipality in the state. Those things belong out in the county, but not in the municipality. But now, in light of where we are today, we want to reconsider that. And so they come to you, and this is where we debate in the public square, should we have an urban chicken ordinance? Should we allow chickens in town or not? We're going to have that discussion facilitated by all y'all. And it allows the public to participate in that and share their values, their interests, their concerns. And as you're trying to balance, right? You're the local government trying to balance that. Some communities might fall on the side of, we're not going to allow chickens in our community, right? We feel like the energy in our community, in this discourse around urban chickens, that there's more people that'd rather not have it than there are people that want it. In other communities, it's just the opposite. There seems to be more people that want it than don't want it. So that's the first part of that decision-making process. We feel there's more people that want it. Okay, so if we're on the side that this is going to happen, well, the next question we want to ask, how many? Right? So that's the whole other debate. So if we're going to have chickens, how many chickens would be appropriate? We've got some communities that say no limit, some that's capped at 22, some are at 6, right? We're all over the board, which is right. I would rather have the legislature not legislate for you, telling you how many chickens you need to have or allow in your community. Let each community determine that on your own, right? The government's closest to the people, which your ordinance on urban chickens may look very different than Sydney, Montana's ordinance or Missoula, Montana's. Each community should have their ordinances and laws that govern them be a reflection of that community's interest. And that's, you're at the fulcrum having that conversation and trying to find and restore balance. So continue with that conversation, right? So how many we're going to have? Should we have a chicken coop required or not? And if we're going to require a chicken coop, will it be inspected? And if we're going to inspect it, are we going to have a fee for the inspection? If we're going to have a fee for the inspection, well, should we have a permit? Right? So all these things are discussed. And this is what fills out your ordinance that eventually is brought before the people. Say, okay, this is what we heard from you. Here's how we put it down in a policy or an ordinance that reflects this conversation we've been having for the last 6 months. What say you? And then you have your multiple hearings and either adopt it or you don't. Pick on Belgrade because they're fun to pick on. They had 2 ordinances come before the commission. Both of them failed before the commission. So urban chickens, twice were brought before the council, twice the council rejected it. So a petition was initiated by the citizens that wanted chickens. And that went through, met the criteria, was put on the ballot. So the citizens voted on having chickens, and it lost. Tenacious chicken owners there, they went through and did it again, and they put it back on the ballot, and it finally passed. So 4 attempts, finally took on the last one. So now Belgrade has chickens, virtue of an ordinance adopted by the public. So the interesting thing there is think how many permits do you think they've now let out in the city of Belgrade for urban chickens? 4 or 5? Yeah. So lots and lots of energy spent on the discussion for 4 or 5. There was a town on the High Line that had this discussion. They had to move their city council meetings to the auditorium at the gym or at the school because so many people were participating, they couldn't keep them all in the city hall. And they did this for 6 months, having these big meetings, 300 people showing up. That's the High Line, it's winter. What else are you gonna do? So they went through that conversation and they eventually adopted the ordinance. And there was a guy that was at every meeting getting up in public comment, really advocating for the ability to have chickens in their community. And the city clerk, about 6 months after that ordinance went into effect, was at the city post office getting the mail for the city hall, and she sees this gentleman that had been at each of those meetings, and she said, I've noticed you haven't come in to get a permit for chickens. He says, chickens? I don't want chickens. What makes you think I want chickens? And she said, well, you were at the meeting talking about how we need chickens and allow this to happen. He said, I don't want to have chickens. I have no interest in chickens, but I'd want to live in a community where those that want chickens can have chickens. So I use that as a story because it helps us understand and appreciate that sometimes governing isn't always about our own self-interest, that there's a greater cause that you were reflecting on and trying to figure out, particularly at your seat. And for the public, they may not necessarily be advocating for their own self-interest. They may be advocating for a type of a community they would like to live in. They may or may not be participating in that particular activity or function or feature of the community, but it's something they value or something that the community values as a whole. And I think that's part of your role as well, is how do you facilitate that conversation? How do you find that balance and asking those questions and eliciting the input from the community, and then try to find that sweet spot where this is the best decision for the most people. And that's always a challenge, right? And that's a moving target, and this is why I often will say that government is all a big experiment. Your charter, which we'll get to in a minute, your charter is an experiment. It just so happens that you've been operating under this experiment for what, 60 years, 50 years? There's nothing sacred about it. It didn't come off of a mountain. Just local folks figured out, what if we do this? What will happen? Let's try it out for 10 years. If we don't like it, we can revisit in 10 years and we can update it and make it better. I'll tell you that West Yellowstone, they've been operating with a charter for, I don't know, 30 or 40 years. Every year they vote to do a local government review, the 10-year review that's happening right now that your citizens chose not to do. But every year they look at their charter. And over that course of the 10 years, from the last time they updated it to this current time, they say, where are the friction spots? Where are the spots that are causing a little bit of tension or friction, or there's inelegant language that could be improved upon because it's either ambiguous, but we thought it was clear at the time, but now we're reading it, it's like, oh gosh, I'm not sure what that means. And there's different interpretations, and it creates friction. And a lot of energy is spent trying to interpret that and figure out what to do. So they take note. And 10 years later, they vote to say, yes, let's look at it again, and they tweak that language. So at this point, they're just tweaking language, and it's getting better and better. And when I say better, better for West Yellowstone. It's what works for them, which may not work for you, right? We're not going to use theirs for yours or yours for theirs, but it works for them, and it's grown and developed from the citizens, implemented by the governing body. So it's an experiment, so there's nothing sacred about your charter. I'll just throw that out there, and it can be looked at, evaluated in a variety of different ways, one of which is the local government review that happens every 10 years, but you're not locked into that. If there's things that are happening in your community or on the state that say, wow, that charter is going to be a real liability the way it's written right now, is there a better alternative that we can introduce to the public, the citizens of Billings, and say, how about this rather than that? Because that might be a greater liability given the tone and temper of our current legislature. All right. Making sense at all, or am I just, okay. So in your packet, there should be on the left-hand side, that guide to elected officials. I'm assuming that they already have a copy of this. I just made a copy of the pages that I want to talk about. I think it's like 180 pages or something long. And that should be your Bible, if you will, right? That's the thing you should be referring to provide guidance for you as a commission.
Dan's referencing the manual that we gave for orientation. So those of you who've been on the council for a few years, it's maybe not. I think what he included, well, there it is. Yep. So I think he was worried that the goals in it might have been a prior set that was adopted, but I haven't looked at it closely. If it's a newer set, then you have them from the new manual.
So the way I explain this for local governments, and in particular for those that are new to this space, and by the way, welcome. You're going to have a heck of a ride for those of you that just joined the commission. And having been an elected official before, that changed my life. I am where I am right now because of being elected as mayor of the city of Choteau. I was a county extension agent. I was a former high school ag teacher. So I am a classically trained ag education instructor. And look at what I'm doing now. Has absolutely nothing to do with ag. And my whole life shifted when I became an elected mayor, and I realized, oh my goodness, what opportunity to provide leadership in my community. And that put me on a trajectory that brought me to where I'm at now. So now I'm having impact and influence on local governments all over the state, hopefully for the better. All right, so this is cool stuff. And so I'm going to try to briefly, which you'll notice Dan never says anything briefly. We're going to review the power, form, and plan of government, and we'll see where you fit in all this. So there are two types of powers that local governments can choose in the state of Montana. Currently, Billings operates with self-governing powers, but Yellowstone County operates with general governing powers. So you're kind of split in the county in which you're operating in the area you're operating. So powers, there's general governing powers. And what that means is with general governing powers, you can exercise power and authority that's granted to you by the legislature. So, and the Constitution. So if it doesn't specifically give you authority in the Constitution or by the legislature, you can't do it. For example, the easy one is the town of Saco, Montana, up on the Highline. They own gas wells. And they've decided, we own these gas wells, why don't we provide a gas utility to our residents? Well, if you look in the Montana Code, there's nowhere in the MCA that it gives a municipality the authority to operate a gas utility. So if they were in general governing powers, they wouldn't be able to do that. Same story with Troy. Troy has a hydroelectric facility, and they have an electric utility that they provide electricity to their residents of the town of Troy. Like they do water, sewer, and garbage, they also provide electricity. Again, nowhere in the law does it allow a municipality to operate a electric utility. So they're operating with what's called self-governing powers. Self-governing powers that the city of Billings operates with is the power and authority. You can exercise any power or authority that's not prohibited by the law or the Constitution. So unless the legislature specifically says, thou shalt not do this, or prohibits you from doing something, outside of that space of prohibition, anything that has a governmental purpose, you can access or perform that duty or exercise a power or authority. And you do that through the ordinance process. You reach out and say, beyond the general governing powers, which you have all the same powers as the general governing powers municipality, and any other power you might want to exercise that's not prohibited by the legislature. So it gives you a lot more flexibility to solve problems and to meet the needs of your constituents or your residents without having to wait for the legislature to anticipate or contemplate a solution to a problem that may be Billings specific. I don't know, you guys probably have enough clout, you can make them or encourage them to say, it's a problem we've got, can you fix it for us? And they might do that. But I'll tell you, Saco, if they go down knocking on the legislature's door, they're gonna say, hey, unless this has application across the state, fix it yourself, get self-governing powers. Does that make sense? So that's the space you're operating. You can do anything in general governing powers and anything else that has a governmental purpose as long as it's not prohibited by the legislature. And I'll just be frank, or Larry, they're adding to that list every session. I haven't seen what's been added this last session, but they're adding to the list. 10 years ago, there was about 20 things that were prohibited. Now we're up to about 30. So in the last 3-4 sessions, they've added another 10 issues. So what are some of those things that are prohibited? The easy one I like to talk about is, I use the example of, I'll use it with you guys too. The height of amateur radio antennas, or the ability to operate an amateur radio in a moving vehicle. So they have prohibited local governments from being able to pass ordinances that regulates the height of antennas and operating an amateur radio in a car. Now, why would the state, unless the ham radio community has a really strong lobby, which they may, I don't know, but what would be the interest of the state to remove your ability to regulate those amateur radios? Thoughts? Yes.
Public
Keep going.
safety.
Yes. Yes, the public safety. So it is part of the state's emergency response network. And so if we have every jurisdiction regulating the height of those antennas, it really compromises the ability to communicate in the time of emergency. So that's when there's a state interest, they say, look, we're going to reserve the right, we'll manage it on our side, rather than have every jurisdiction having their regulation. Same with elevators, grain elevators, and some of the things that happen in the ag community down in most downtowns of small towns across the state have a big old grain elevator. And they say, look, that's a part of our ag economy. It's fundamental to the success of our state. We're reserving to the state the ability to regulate the operations of those grain elevators and some of the things that are going on in that ag sector. It makes sense for the state to maintain that so that Harvest States doesn't have different rules in every little jurisdiction around the state. So those are the things that are examples that you can think about. The other, I won't get into, but the fees, impact fees. City of Bozeman was the one that brought up impact fees. They have self-governing powers, and they said, look, with all this development that's happening, there's an impact. And rather than having people that live in Bozeman, long-standing residents, it's not fair to have them pay for an expansion of a sewer lagoon or additional wells for their water system or whatever it might be. Why are the existing residents paying for this growth and development? Is there a way that growth and development should pay for itself? And so they developed impact fees. But there's an impact when you bring on 300 new homes in our city, that's going to impact on fire, roads, right? We got to expand a road. We got to put in a traffic signal. All these impacts. Why should all the rest of us pay it until that subdivision comes online? So impact fees is a way for them to buy into the system, right? Do you think the building and development community thought that was a grand idea? No. They were sued, and it was ruled that no, the city does have the authority to create those impact fees because they have self-governing powers. It's not a prohibited authority. And it worked so well that other municipalities started creating impact fees. And then because of the leadership coming from local governments, the state said, well, that's a good idea. Why don't we do that statewide? And now the state has, in the MCA, all general governing powers, municipalities and counties can develop impact fees. Yeah, question.
If we're self-governing powers, and you say we have the same as local government powers, when the big bill passed in 2002, and the state assumed the district courts, the state assumed a lot of our gambling money and all of that. We also, in that bill, had an opportunity, and local governments have taken advantage of it, to be able to increases on their health care coverage are being able to have a permissive levy to do that each year instead of seeing the general fund dwindle every year. How come we're not able to in the city of Billings, but the county is able to? If we have the local government
Right
power.
to the heart of it. All right.
You got it.
What's that?
You've got it.
Oh, yeah, I got it. Yeah. Yep. All right. So, sorry. In your packet. Is that good? On the left-hand side, that the big one that's your, what are we calling it? The Guide to Elected Officials, November 19th. In there, starting on page 5, is your charter. So to kind of lead up to this, to answer your question and to give some additional context, okay? Forms of government. Let me just hit on that real quick, and then we'll circle back to this question here. The forms of government, right? So we have the powers of government, and then there's the forms of government that the cities and counties can choose from. And these are relevant for cities or counties, these forms. So I'll list them out. I'm not going to do all of them because they may not they may not be relevant to you. Those are the most relevant I wanted to talk about. There's a couple others. One's the town meeting form of government that's not an option for you because you're too big. And the other one is commission presiding officer. We have an elected commission, and that commission then elects the presiding officer who becomes the chief executive outside of the meeting. 2 in the state operate that way. So, yeah. Yeah, I'll move it over this way.
Yeah, could you move it over so we can see it?
You're still cut out of luck, sorry. So we have the commission executive form of government. And what these are doing, the way this works is it's defining the different forms of branches of government. Legislative branch being the commission side, they're making the laws, policies, and ordinances. And then you have the executive side where they're executing that, right? They're implementing it. So in this one, the commission executive, where you have an elected commission and an elected chief executive. So think Laurel, think Butte, Silver Bow County, the consolidated city county government. They have 12 elected commissioners and an elected chief executive. Anaconda Deer Lodge is the same way. Missoula is the same way in their structure. I will say that Missoula operates with the charter, as do the two consolidated cities and counties. We'll get to the charter in a second. But that's kind of the structure of how things are operating. The commission manager, where you have an elected commission, and then the commission then hires, based on merit, the manager. And then you have the commission or the elected county officials form. Basically, the ECOF and the commission are very similar. There's a nuance to it. I won't get into it for you right now, but that is how the county commission in Yellowstone County operates, where you have an elected commission who operates as both the legislative branch and the executive branch rolled into one governing body. So they make the policies and laws, and they're responsible for making sure that they're executed. That's why they'll do hiring of the public or the department heads, and they make sure that they're evaluating those department heads, unlike these other forms where they're responsible, like your form, you're responsible for making, we'll say, the HR policy, but the executing or enforcing the HR policy is left to the administration or the manager. I'm assuming that, yeah. Is this making sense so far? I'm going to put down there the charter. The charter is then a local constitution, if you will. It's where you're defining in your charter the branches of government. How do we select the legislative branch? Are they elected at large? Are they elected from wards? A combination of at large and wards? How do we want to do that? Are they going to be elected on partisan basis or nonpartisan basis? Are they going to be 2-year, 4-year, 6-year terms? So those are the things that could be included in the charter defining all that. And then you have the executive branch. How do we select them? Is it going to be hired like an administrator? Are we going to elect the person? If we're going to elect them, are they elected on a partisan basis? What's the term of office? 2 years, 4 years, 6, 8, 10, 12, whatever. So those are the things that are defined in your charter. So as you read through your charter, you'll be picking up, oh, here's the section on the legislative branch. These are the powers, duties, and responsibilities. Here's the section on the administrator or the chief executive. What are their duties, powers, and responsibilities? And then what other administrative duties and responsibilities that the city has. Now, to your question about the permissive levy, back in 1977 or 76, when this was placed on the ballot at the first local government review, I don't have any knowledge of this, but this is what plays out in my mind, is that study commission, probably in a negotiated agreement with the public, hey, we would like to do this. We would like to have self-governing powers, because it's all new. No one else had done this. This was brand new after the 1974 or 72 Constitution. Did it even introduce the idea of self-governing powers? It didn't exist before. And we're the only state that has what I would qualify as truly self-governing powers. We are not a home rule state. Nowhere in the Constitution or the MCA does it even use the words home rule. Just to be clear, it's a pet peeve. I don't know if it came across that way. We are a self-governing state where we are, as the Supreme Court of Montana said, we have shared sovereignty with the state of Montana. You, the city of Billings, have shared sovereignty. So back to that question we could get to later about the local-state relationship. You've got to figure out, and we have to figure out as a society in Montana, what does that mean to have shared sovereignty? And what does it mean if the state can pierce your sovereignty and make a change to your charter? I don't know. And is that a question worthy of asking? And if you were to ask it, how do you do that? In what form? Let that sit heavy. So to your question, and I think it says in bottom of page 5, section 1.02, which is struck out, currently struck out. And I think that's because of the recent legislation. I guess the question is whether these apply. And I think it goes back, it kind of responds to your question. And I think it was a negotiated agreement with the public. We want to have self-governing powers. We want to have a charter, but in order to do that, and at the time, things were rampant. That's what led to I-105, which happened in the 80s. There was kind of a revolt on property tax, and then the big bill. Some of those things happened as a result of the perception that local government was a little bit out of check with their property taxes. And so I think this was a negotiated agreement that, hey, we'll give you this expansive power of self-governing powers. However, we want to make sure that that doesn't mean you're just going to go run hog wild on adding mills. And so they incorporated in the charter that you have a cap on your mills. And so that's where it comes from, right? So your ability to access the permissive levies is inconsistent with your charter. So that's a conversation that you can have with the community, right? In order to say we want to access the permissive levy and throw things at me like $20 bills if I'm off track, or 50s if you got them. Ask the public, hey, we're leaving opportunity, and we have to find in our budget more and more money to keep up with the cost of healthcare for our employees, to be an employer of choice in the Valley, right? In order to maintain that, we've got to provide benefits, and that keeps going up. And so as those benefits go up, our ability to continue providing services is going down. We either need more money or we're going to cut on services. And that's a tough conversation to have. And that's why the legislature allows both self-governing and general governing powers the ability to levy to keep up with the cost of healthcare beyond what is voted in or what is permissive by 1510-420. So that's a permissive levy. And so that's an opportunity, because of your charter, is left on the table. It's not on the table. It's not an option for you. So in order to access that, you would have to go to the voters who adopted your charter and say, hey, it's a big experiment. Things are changing, life's changing, and this document, we need to do a little freshen up. There's some things that we need to probably consider and have that conversation in the public square. What would make sense for us to do? If we were going to modify it, where would we want to modify it? And you can see it's not, you have done this multiple times. You can see the history there. Your library, public safety, you keep going out to the public saying, the only way you can increase the mills is if they voted in. And what's interesting with the big bill in 1510-420 and 425 is that's the same thing. Now your charter is in lockstep with the legislature in that you cannot increase the mills without a vote of the people, which didn't exist when this charter was created. Now you can't increase your mills without a vote of the people. So to have that there, which the state already requires it, and you can't do anything other than that. Meanwhile, these opportunities like the permissive levy or rate of inflation, just keeping up with inflation. So and I'm not advocating one way or the other. That's a decision that you and the city of Billings needs to have in this conversation about how do we want to be governed and what makes sense for us. And maybe we want to be in this, doing it the way we've been doing it.
Just to follow up with that, if the charter reads that you can't raise above the mills, how can you keep on raising the fees for services?
My simple answer is they're two different things.
Okay.
Yeah. Fees are separate and they're tied to enterprise funds, and then you have your levies, which is tied to property tax, and they're calculated two different ways. But I think I hear what you're saying, principle-wise.
Well, really, if you use the money for running the local government and you don't have enough and you have to raise your fees, then you're infringing on exactly what you said, which would be you're going above what the charter is. So that's a concern, but okay.
Yeah, and yes, and this could be some of that ambiguity I was talking about before. Back to the West Yellowstone idea that you haven't had a lot of check on this. You haven't had a lot of opportunity in the city of Billings over the last 50 years to crack this thing open and take a look at it. What's under the hood, and do we need to do a tune-up on it? And so it's one of those things that you consistently say, we're good with what we got.
So you keep using the term, the shared sovereignty.
Ooh, yeah.
But when you look at what's been presented as our charter, that veil got pierced and now it's all being struck through. And half of what our citizens voted for and put in place as basically our sovereignty has been compromised. And now we're being told, just ignore what you voted and you put in place and that you're not really as sovereign as we told you really were. So it leaves us in a spot now that really we're being forced to go back to the public and say, I know you didn't want to review your form of government, but the legislature just decimated half of your charter. So do we then say we have to go back and have a whole nother discussion on what our charter should look like?
It could be a start. So either that compels you to go back to the public and say, hey, we need to rethink this document. It's becoming unwieldy, if you will, based on the things that are happening around in the state. You can always appeal to the judicial branch of government and say, hey, does the legislature really have that authority to do what they did? We don't know. And they'll step into that space, and unless checked, they'll assume that space now is ours. I'm not advocating one way or the other, but so that's how we, and this is where, this is the whole system that it's set up, is we have the checks and balances and how we push back and forth, and we get clarity on where is our space, where should we be occupying in the governing of our communities and the state, who's in the shared sovereignty idea. And so this is a relatively new, I think, in the last 10 years of this occurrence where the state has stepped in and overruled the vote of the people without a check. So it's becoming the assumption, because the precedents, that we've allowed it enough to where it might become the thing until it's been asked, the question's been asked. I'm not saying you guys would be the ones that need to ask the question, but I'm okay. Again, throw dollar bills. Gina's like shaking her head, this yahoo. What's he doing? I'm going to clean up all this mess when he's done. All right. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Is the only way for the city to ask that question, would it be, I know you're not advocating for anything, I'm just generally curious, would it be for the city to sue the state? Is that the only way to get an answer from the judicial branch on the legality of this?
So,
or is there any other path to some kind of a ruling that doesn't involve a protracted lawsuit?
Yeah, so that's one option. Another option, I'm assuming, would be to ask the Attorney General. I don't know if that's a space that the Attorney General has the authority to to have that kind of a conversation. But that would be, typically, that would be a way where you say, the law is unclear. Rather than stepping out and saying, we're going to try it and wait for the public to sue us, like the open meeting law, the 48-hour noticing of open meetings, that was not determined by the legislature, that was determined by the Attorney General. Because city and county attorneys said, I don't know, when you use in the law ambiguous language like adequate notice, that's what the law says, you need to provide adequate notice. What the heck does that mean? Right? For you, clearly, you look like a person that tweeted out, give me 4 hours and I'm there. Right? Like, you get, give me that vibe.
Sure.
2 weeks notice, letter in the mail, bring a van by to pick me up, right? So that, you give me that vibe. It's just the way it is, Tony. So if I'm to write the policy, right, and use adequate notice, do I use it to your interpretation of adequate or your interpretation, right? So rather than putting this 12 hours I feel is adequate, and the public says no, you're dealing with a constitutional right here that I have a right to know, and 12 hours is not an honest effort. And so then we go through a protracted lawsuit. The other option is, well, let's ask the Attorney General. What does the Attorney General say? And that's where we get the 48-hour notice. So we've been operating with that ruling or that decision, that opinion, since I think 1989. And the legislature just cracked that legislation open this last 2023. They had an opportunity to clarify that section of the code. And they punted, well, they just said, well, everyone is happy with the 48 hours. The Attorney General's opinion pretty much is it. And so that's where we're at right now. We're still operating and functioning on a 48-hour notice from an Attorney General opinion that's 40 years old. So whether that's an appropriate question to ask the Attorney General in this situation, I don't know. That's beyond my scope. But But there's ways, this is how the system works, right? We have the opportunity to check back and forth, and the courts can step in and say, yeah, that is consistent with the Constitution or the law, or it's not. And they may not tell us. That's the thing about 48 hours. You could say, well, we think it's 12 hours, and someone sues you. The court will come back, and they'll probably say 12 hours is not adequate. But they likely won't tell you what is, because if they did, that's legislating. That's not their purview. And so it gets kicked back over to the legislature, say, well, what are you going to do? And so then they have to come up with defining the ambiguous language of adequate notice. And that hasn't happened, so that's why we're... The other thing, the 3-minute notice or the 3 minutes for public comment, we're just doing it, right? There's no guidance one way or the other. And you know why you have 3 minutes and not 2 or 1? Because the legal community has sat down and said, what would be considered the least reasonable? Right? So what can we do will be the minimum that we can do that we likely won't get sued. And they figured 3 minutes would be sufficient. If you want to have a 1-minute public comment period, there's a good likelihood that people will say, I can't get my idea across in a minute. And I have a constitutional right to make comment. And that's violating my right, and you're going to end up in court over that. And here's the thing. Our fear is, if the court had the opportunity, they may say, you can't limit the time of comment. So then, guess what? Open mic night at Billings City Hall every Monday night, right? So everyone's trying to be very judicious about how we use this. We don't want to overstep for fear that we're going to be pushed back and held in check, and it may not be the answer we want. So we want to be very careful about how some of these things we, assume these things until we're told otherwise, but try to be reasonable. And I think that's the key, what's reasonable, right? Okay, back, do I have anything outstanding? Any question I haven't answered? Did I answer your question? I got there? Okay. Maybe not the answer you wanted, but it was an answer.
I just add, Dan, we're rightfully offended that the legislature deleted all these sections of our charter.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, as you use the term today, our shared sovereignty, I wonder if in our shared sovereignty, we couldn't ask our voters to pass some form of a local option sales tax. Well, the state says unequivocally, you can't have that if you're over population 5,500.
Yeah.
And in this case, they're now saying you two communities can't have a different property tax structure than everyone else, is one of the arguments that was made as we shared with them this dilemma it creates. That's not the legal answer, attorneys may disagree on that for sure, but that generally speaking, that's what we got pushed back on and commonly heard. And I would ask if our citizens swapped a property tax for a sales tax, pretty confident Montana would say, no. We've said you can't do that for decades.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is not the only time that they've done that. Like I said, in the recent history, that Missoula, I think it was Missoula County, voted in a gas tax. It is an option that the county could do that for a long time. It's been on the books for 30 years, and they hasn't been exercised all that frequently until Missoula does it. And suddenly that's no longer acceptable. And they repealed that law, and then they took that vote of the people who chose that this is how we want to help finance and fund the impact of all these folks that are driving through our community and impacting our streets. Again, it's that fairness, right? The idea of fairness that it's back to the same with the impact fees. There's a fairness issue there that they were arguing by having a road tax or a gas tax for people that were impacting their roads that we all pay for. Anyway, so that was taken away. So and again, those are the two things of recent history where they've kind of pierced and gone in there and taken away that sovereignty. And it's not my language. This is the Supreme Court in Madison County in 1988. That's what the court was early on interpreting this self-governing powers concept. And again, it's setting precedents for the rest of us to say, okay, there's another line in the sand for us to think about how we can exercise this authority, because it was brand new and nowhere else in the country is anyone using this structure of government, this idea of self-governing powers. I'm super proud of our Constitution, those delegates that came up with this really creative solutions. And these issues, this idea of being more self-determined on the local level was boiling in this state for a long time, and which was one of the reasons why local governments were pushing for a constitutional convention, because the legislature was unable to agree on expansive powers granting to the municipalities to be able to solve some of their problems. Even if they were to adopt the home rule structure that most other states have, they were unwilling to do it with, losing the votes for 1 or 2 votes away from making it happen. So they said the only way this is going to happen if we have a new constitutional convention. So the other thing I want to touch on, particularly for those folks that are new, this handout here, and I want to focus on the circles here. And back to the idea of we're trying to find balance, right? Where you're the fulcrum and you're moving that fulcrum back and forth, trying to find that balance in your community. When the folks come knocking on your door here saying, hey, we want an urban chicken ordinance, you say, okay, we're kind of out of balance, and now we've got to have the conversation, facilitate that discussion in the public square, and try to determine what's the best for the most moving on. And again, it's an experiment. We're going to try it. If it doesn't work, we can modify it, we can change it, we can repeal it. That's all at your disposal. Nothing you're doing is locked in for good. Now, the next question is, how do you make decisions? What sort of framework are you using as you bring as these ideas come to you, either proposed from this bench or from the public saying, hey, what about this? And the things I want you to think about, and I will challenge you and encourage you, if you've got other things in your mind that you're using to evaluate or as evaluative criteria in your decision-making process, I want to hear it because I want to add it to this list. I've been adding to it over the years, and this is where we're at now, but I want to add more. If you're using something to help you make better decisions, what is it that you're using? So in this case, one of the things, and it's not applicable for every situation or every issue that comes before you, but ask your question, and maybe in a debate amongst yourselves, is this financially viable? Do we have the money today, and will we have the money tomorrow? Beware of people bearing gifts. Hey, we'll do this thing for you, and then we'll donate it to the city. Well, what they're saying is we're going to go out and build something, and then we're going to give you the liability and the maintenance forever. Are you ready for that? Right? For the cost of that jungle gym that a good group of concerned parents next to a park wants to donate to the city. We'll buy it, we'll put it together, and then we'll give it to you. The cost of that versus the next 50, 100, 150 years of trying to maintain that structure. Because once that's established, the expectation is there's always going to be that structure there or a structure like that. And so just be prepared. Is it financially viable? That's just one example of that broader idea of financial viability, but those are one of the things that come to mind. Is it publicly acceptable? This is the thing I learned when I was mayor, that there's a lot of issues that need to be dealt with. And so I was picking up cans that have been kicked down the road for months and months and years and decades. And you start picking those things up. It needs to be dealt with, it needs to be dealt with. Let's do this, let's do that. And what I found is after about 2 years, I was at a pace that was going far faster than my community was able to keep up. I understood the issues. I understand the importance. I understood exactly what needed to be done. The community hadn't gone through that same process of understanding, appreciating, and coming to the terms with the conclusion that I had. They could have and they would have given time. I was going too fast. They couldn't keep up. So some wise council members said, Dan, we love you. We think what you're doing is great. We've never said no. We're getting some pushback from the public. Things are going too fast. So we just rethought what we were doing. We still knew what the issues were. We still knew what needed to be done. But rather than us doing it and pushing it forward and getting it done in 3 months, we said, let's appoint a committee. Now, I'm not advocating for committees, but that was the solution for us. We appointed a committee to evaluate and study that particular issue and look at all the options. We had a committee looking at our garbage collection. The Joint Refuse District was going to double our rates. We thought that's unacceptable, not on our watch. And so we negotiated with them to hold off, give us a year, let's do some planning. So we had a committee that was looking at what ways can we improve our garbage collection system and make it more efficient. They came with all sorts of interesting ideas, the same ideas that we had going into it. We know what we needed to do. We needed them to come along. So they were making, and for some reason, it's more acceptable by the public when it comes from a bunch of volunteers, unlike you, that were appointed by the city commission with their recommendations, having studied it, and those recommendations, than if it would just come from us. We'll play the game. So we adopted those things, and we were able to reduce our waste stream, we reduced our cost, we improved service without changing our rates. I think they went up 12 cents. So our rates went up 12 cents rather than being doubled. Our service went up, and all because we were able to put a microscope to it, evaluate it, had the public give suggestions and ideas, and things that happened that we never would have expected. Volunteerism went up, people supported and donated a lot of stuff to help us accomplish that outcome. Okay, publicly acceptable, bring them along, political willingness to act. Part of that's all y'all here, right? We got to make sure, are we willing to take action on this? Are we ready? Is the issue ripe for us to take it on? So your willingness to act, are we using the best science available, right? We think about at the time, 40 years ago, when Billings was making certain decisions, given the information they had, the science available at the time, it seemed like a reasonable decision. Today, given what we know, we think, oh my gosh, what were they thinking? Well, we didn't know, but we're using the best science available. And at some point in the future, people look back at you and say, what were you thinking? You know, didn't you know this? I said, well, no, we didn't know that, right? What is it, Forever Chemicals, PFAS? Who would have thought, right? DWR, Gore-Tex, just 2 years ago was a thing. Now, not so much because of the Forever Chemicals. We know more about that now than we did 10 years ago. So use what you can. Is it environmentally sound? Are we using an ethical process? And finally, my favorite one is the decision equitable over time? Are we making decisions that we're not burdening a future generation because I want to maintain civility amongst my neighbors? I don't want to get pushback. And I'll use water rates or sewer rates. I don't think anyone's ever had a hearing on raising water rates where the public shows up and says, great idea, do that. Right? They're going to be, every person in the room is going to say, no, don't do it. Right? But if you're using this as a framework, you can explain to the public, yes, I hear what you're saying. I don't want it to go up either. However, I want to make sure that what I'm paying for my water and my sewer and whatever other rates, I want to make sure I'm paying my fair share, that I'm not burdening my children or grandchildren because I'm unwilling to pay my share. And there's a lot around the state, and you're probably experiencing this right now. In Shoto, we ended up having to raise water rates because they had been neglected. We had a flat rate of $15 a month for the previous 20 years. And we were loaning money from the general fund to support the enterprise funds. You don't do that, right? But they were artificially keeping it low because no one wanted to face the public when they had to raise water rates. So I was the unpopular guy. And when we have to raise the water rates, it goes from $15 a flat fee per month to $35 a month. And now it's up about $60 a month, as they've really figured out what that is 20 years later. Right? And the idea and the argument is I don't want to have this system. As I look at the rates, and we're trying to calculate the rates and what's equitable, is I'm looking at what is the cost of maintenance and operation, what's the depreciation of the system, and the replacement cost. So I'm putting away money in that account day over day, week over week, year over year, that when that system is ready to be upgraded and improved, that I have the money in the bank, right? Or some of the money could be matched for loans or whatever else, or grants. But what's the chance in the future that we're going to get lots of money and grants from the federal government or the state government? I think they've been making substantial investments in rural America, you all being part of rural America, in grants and low rate loans for a long time, saying, we're going to help you out now. But moving forward, you get your rates up there where they're sustainable, that when you need to replace it, you got your own money to do that because we won't be here. And I think we're gotten to that point where that spigot's turned off, and now it's on us. I got a call from a newly elected mayor, his third time in that office, both previous times he'd been recalled. He calls me up and says, Dan, I'm looking at this water fund, and we've got $6 million sitting there. That's criminal. These rates have been artificially high for so long. They've got $6 million sitting there. It's a rainy day fund. I'm going to start lowering water rates and drain that $6 million fund because this is just flat out inappropriate. So how does that make you feel? My comment to him is say, okay, Mayor, how old is your system, your water system? He said, well, it's about 20 years old. 20 years ago is when we did our last major infrastructure investment in it. I said, how much more time do you have left on it? He says, well, probably another 20 years before we got to do another major rehab. All right, given the size of your town, how many millions of dollars do you think it's going to take to do that? He said probably 25 or $30 million. All right, so 15 years down the road, you're going to have to redo this, rehab this system. For 20 years, you've got $6 million in the account. You think that's enough? He said, I get it. I understand now. So not only do you have $6 million in the account, you're probably way behind. And you got to think about how do we raise that again so we can put more money aside for the replacement cost. So that that future generation in 20 years from now isn't having to pay $180 for water rates because you wanted to have $30 a month water rates. Right? Somebody somewhere is going to pay for it. So those are the challenges that you have is how do we create good policy? What's the framework are we using to make our decisions? Not every one of these is going to be applicable, but which ones are applicable for the issue that you're facing? Have that conversation and help the public come along in that discussion. And that, I think that's going to help you feel more confident in your decisions, and your decisions will be more resilient, i.e. lasting. They'll have more resilience and lasting. All right. You feel like I'm preaching? I don't want to be preaching. Is it okay so far? You're just glaring at me. Whatever, Dan. What's doing it? Amen, brother. All right. How much time? We done it. And when do we go to? Okay. So just yeah. All right. All right. So your charters, your both your local constitution, your plan. As I said, it's an experiment, and I think it's worthy of a discussion. I was going to touch on how do you change it. You don't have to wait every 10 years. That is one option, every 10 years, and then you're dependent upon the public whether they want to vote to support that or not. And usually, when you put that on the ballot, it's with a price tag. What is it going to cost for us to do a study? And if they're resistant to pay extra money for the study, that's fine. You still have the ability to access that process via an ordinance. You pass an ordinance to place a question on the ballot. You can do that. I would suggest before you do that, that you impanel your own study commission. Right? Appoint people and say, hey, we want you to study our existing charter and look at other alternatives and suggestions. I'm doing that with the city of Bozeman right now. They have me coming in there every couple of weeks with their study commission saying, hey, this is the way our Bozeman City Charter reads right now. What are other people doing? What opportunities are we missing? What additional language should we add so we can expand our access to opportunity? Or what things are maybe holding us back because the structure we chose back in 1988 is no longer working for us? They're debating whether 5 commissioners is sufficient or they should jump up to 7. Right? You may be considering, is 10 too many? Should we go down to 8 or 7? Those are conversations to have. I think Butte's having the same conversation. Butte has 12 commissioners. They're saying, God, that's not working so well for us. Right? They haven't changed it, but they're talking about, should we propose that as a change? So those are things that, so by ordinance, you can place a question on the ballot. I would suggest before you do that, you get that engagement from the public and say, this is what we think would be some good ideas. The other option is the public, through a petition process, they can petition to put something on the ballot for the voters to adopt or change. So at the end of the day, any changes you want to do to your charter, any your structure form of government has to be approved by the voters. It's not something you can just do by a stroke of the pen. The voters have to validate that. So that's it. You're in the driver's seat with some of that proposal or ideas for making changes. So that's from the charter. What else we had on our list of? We talked local and state committees and boards. What was the idea on committees and boards? Remember that question at the beginning? Okay. All right, we're all ignoring. So I'll just say, if you do appoint a committee, be clear about what their purpose is. Do it by a resolution. So there's a memorializing. We want you to do these things on our behalf. Make sure you're clear about what their responsibility is and what you want back from them. Give them their marching orders and with some level of clarity. So they're purpose-driven. What we find, and usually we're called in when there's static, when there's a problem. And usually the problems stem from a lack of communication. And when there's a void of understanding, people will we'll just step into the void. And when that when they step into the void and it far exceeds the expectations of the parent governing body, then we have a conflict. And so then we're tussling over power and authority and all that stuff. So just be clear on it. If you want to impanel a group of people, study this thing, say, hey, we want to have a group for a year, look at this issue on our charter and make a recommendation back for us that we can put on the ballot. Things like that.
So as
Yeah.
we talk about committees, a lot of them, the committees, it doesn't seem to be, some things aren't defined that much. So we could go back and set up a committee of the council to be able to review each of these committees and make a recommendation back to the council if we really need them or not.
Yeah.
And there has to be, as you said, responsibility, what we want back. What are they really there for? It's not to meet once a month just for the sake of meeting, right?
Yeah. For example, and I'm not saying this is a good plan or a good idea, and I think there's some downsides to it, but the city of Bozeman went through and they had a bucket of boards. They had bunches of them. And it's just a lot to manage. And so they went to the idea of a super boards. And so they went down from like 30 to like, I don't know, 10 or 15 boards. And they've grouped a lot of different issues under one board, kind of like issues. And so we're going to make one board, and we're going to, instead of having 3 boards that did this stuff, we're going to have one board do it, work in this space. So pros and cons, I think give it a chance, they would probably do it a little bit different, but that's still the idea of how do we make it more lean and efficient, and I think being clear about what you want from them. Because there are a lot of boards that they just meet out of momentum, or that you're doing things just out of momentum. We still have boards that, we established 30 years ago, and it's just a tradition. And every year we're trying to find somebody to sit on it, and they don't feel like they're, valued. So I will say, in your packet, I did provide this one that's colorful. It's on the back of the right-hand side. This is the list of things that are denied, all those, and I think it's 7.1.111 is the list of denied powers. And I highlighted 20 to 25. Maybe it's only the last, it wasn't 30, I think we're up to 25. I misspoke. But this gives you an idea of things that are in bounds and out of bounds for a charter and those that have self-governing powers. For example, what's off the table is we don't want to have every local government that has self-governing powers create their own electoral process, right? The election criteria. That's one of those things that's going to be reserved to the state. The state creates the framework for elections, administered on the local level through the counties, and not every jurisdiction doing their own thing, right? So some of those things, and you can see in here what they're pulling back, and that would like be 7.1.113 and 114, and like requiring delegation, like number 1, the power to authorize a tax on income or sale of goods. This is the one that's, as Administrator Kukulski was saying, that's one of those things requiring delegation. That's why we're not doing it because they're saying you can't do it. But and then I also included several AG opinions and, where relevant, a Supreme Court case notes that might give you greater context. And I will say we appreciate the city of Billings, the rest of the state does, because you've been pioneers in doing things, exercising self-governing powers that were challenged in court. And the court was able to say, yeah, you have that, or no, you don't have that. And that's been helpful and instructive for the rest of the state as they're trying to navigate what is within our space and what is not in our space. And you folks were trying a lot of stuff, as well as Butte and several others, the major cities. We're trying a lot of things. We're experimenting. We're going to try this. Do we have that power or not? And the courts will say yeah or no when challenged or pushed back on. So thanks for doing that. Thanks for suffering through many lawsuits on our behalf, the rest of us.
Dan?
One for the-
Dan?
Yeah.
Quick question, because we're limited by the legislator on doing certain things. But doesn't the Constitution limit the legislature from what they can do as well within local government?
I'm going to plead ignorance on that. I haven't read it with that lens. So I'll have to go back and read it with that lens to see what it says. Yeah, that's a good question though.
I'll send you some information I looked at.
That would be good. And it, again, it's all our Constitution is an experiment, and we're all just playing it out. And as we see, certain checks and balances, people are going to try to see how far I can go until I've checked. And if we don't check them, then well, we'll keep going. We'll keep going until we say stop. The other thing I wanted to point out is the quasi judicial. This handout here I think will be helpful, instructive for you on the other colorful handout, basics of quasi-judicial decision-making. And I just want to point out, we got 15 minutes, right? So I just want to point out the big altitude, high elevation idea is that you are a governing body that at times wears two hats. I'm assuming most of the time, the hat that you're wearing is the legislator hat. You're wearing the legislator hat where you're making decisions and using your discretion within the law to make decisions based on all sorts of input and ideas and discussions and debate. You have that flexibility to do what you want to exercise, powers that you want to exercise at your discretion. You can take the input from the public or you can completely ignore the public. It's up to you. You have that discretion. The public has given you their ability to make decisions on their behalf. So it's a sacred trust they've given to you, right? And if you want to abuse that, that's fine. You can do it. However, they're going to hold you accountable. Now, as an example I used earlier today, say you've got a big water tower in town and you say, hey, let's paint that water tower pink. All right. So say the public says, what's your school colors, or one of the school colors? Black and orange. Right, you want to paint it pink, and everybody says, why not paint it black and orange? I'm not going to get in trouble now because there's probably two schools here that have two different colors. Three, even better. Okay. So they want to paint it black and orange. You want to paint it pink. And you get every single resident in town comes through here in public comment saying, paint it black and orange. And you decide through your legislative discretion to paint it pink. And they're not happy with it. So they sue you, saying, we all wanted this color, and they made the decision inconsistent with what we said. And aren't they supposed to represent us? Which side of that decision is the court going to side on? Is the court going to say, you're right, they did it wrong, and we're going to force them to change to black and orange? No. The court is going to side with your legislative discretion. You were given the discretion, you exercise your discretion. And what they'll look at is not the decision, but the process you used leading to the decision. So did you notice the meeting 48 hours in advance? Did you allow public comment on the agenda, right? All that progress or all that process stuff is where if you violated that, they can overturn the decision and force you to go back from square one and begin again. So that part is extremely important when you're making decisions, that you honor the law and ensure that the public's rights are protected. And that's what ensures your decision is going to be resilient. Now, that's a whole nother thing, the decisions you make, but you have that discretion to make that decision. That's a hat you're wearing most of the time, I'm going to say. Now, the other hat you're wearing, that's the hat of the quasi-judicial hat. That's when you're acting as a judge, which is different. Think of courtroom, think of law and order. The judges have a specific role. They're not out there campaigning. Judges aren't out soliciting input. They're not asking people to come and testify. They're there to look at the evidence presented in the courtroom during trial. And that's not that different for you when you shift into that quasi-judicial role. You're going to have a hearing where we're going to present evidence on a particular decision, say a land use decision, where you have already established what the law is. Here are our subdivision regulations, a big long list. And here's the application that comes in, and we're going to compare, did that application meet each one of the criteria in our policy? Creating the policy, legislative. Applying the application to the policy is judicial. And you're using a finding of facts. Is it factual? If your policy says streets will be 120 feet wide, you look at the application, is it 120 feet wide? If it is, it meets the criteria. If it's not, that's a finding of fact. It is not meeting it. So you can decline that application based on the fact that it didn't meet the criteria that established. Not that it's going to be building, huge, something that we don't want, right? So the public may not like it, but we've established our rules of engagement ahead of time. Now we're applying that. So that there's a difference in the way you engage the public in this conversation, right? So if you have the public saying, I don't like it for these reasons, you've got to keep your thinking on, what does the law say? We establish the law and we're going to hold the application to the law, not some of these other things. Not that it's not important, but you've got to be thinking about, what is the evidence that we're going to evaluate that on? So that leads us to the ex parte communication, right? So we don't have, if you think about, judges aren't going around soliciting input or seeking advice or from the public. They're not reading the newspapers. They're not going out to the crime scene and looking at the crime scene as they're not doing that. They're sitting back and letting it come to them. So for you going out and getting called up by a developer saying, hey, can you come on out and take a look at the lot? I want to show you around and show you what we're doing. That's not a thing. That's not a thing, right? That would, because you're being influenced and you're seeing things, right, that no one else in the room here, the decision makers, had access to. You're being influenced by something outside of what was brought into the hearing. That's ex parte communication. That's inappropriately influencing you. And the reason why that's important is neither side has the ability to, what's the word I'm looking for? Argue against it or to, the due process and be able to rebut. Thank you. That's what's always good to have an attorney at your side. So each side has the opportunity to rebut it, right? As the developer says this, now the other side can rebut that, just like in a court of law. Here's the evidence. Well, I can rebut the evidence, right? And so that's really the role that you're playing in facilitating this judicial process when it comes to due process and people's property rights. We are putting limitations on how people can use their property via zoning. So I want to make sure I'm honoring your property right, but we as a society decided this is how this particular piece of land can be used. Now, within that framework, are you meeting the criteria? And I have the right to approach you and explain this is what I plan to do. And the other side has the right to say, I don't think they're doing it right. And then you're going to look at the evidence and stand in judgment of that. So it's that due process, rebut. What are the other things I'm missing? What's that? Yeah, so the public has the right to participate and observe and be part of that whole process. And to be able to, they have the right to comment. And you need to bring all that in and try to filter that. What is it at hand and what is, because some parts of that process may not be relevant. The story I use, there's a city that had a downtown district that was zoned, downtown district that was zoned, and someone proposed to bring an adult-themed business into that district, and the city had failed to have the imagination to exclude adult-themed businesses. It was an oversight. And now the proposal's on the table. It's like, oh, we can't quickly change the law, so we've got to go through the process. Now you can imagine what Thanksgiving dinner is going to be like if you're in your role right now and that's on the table. We have the list of criteria and say that application meets every one of the criteria. We just don't want it, right? So everybody, your grandma, your pastor, everyone's saying, you can't make this, you can't let this happen. You can't let this happen. But the challenge is if that person comes and meets every criteria that you establish, saying, if you want to have a business in our downtown corridor, you have to meet this criteria, and they meet all the criteria, just didn't have the one that apparently mattered. So when it comes time to vote, what's that vote going to be? In spite of what the public thinks and wants. You can say it. The vote's going to be, drum roll.
Well, here's my question.
Okay.
Because we come into that often.
Yeah.
And often the criteria is not specific. You have to be 110 feet here or this and that. It's very general. And so I think it's important to know, just like in a court of law, the judge is going to rule and interpret based on different cases. Does this situation fit? So it's the interpretation of the judge to decide one way or the other, does it fit this criteria
Mhm.
or not? And I think that's what we all individually, when we vote, is, do I believe it fits this criteria that the zoning commission has said it does or does not? And if not, I think we want to touch on the fact that
Thank you.
how much interpretation
Yeah.
is there that we can look at to actually change the recommendation that's coming before us, or deny the recommendation that's coming before us in a case like that, where we may find a particular fact, one of our things that say it's community minded or family oriented or something like that. We can say, well, no, this doesn't fit this, and so we're going to deny it, and
Yeah.
we give a reason why, just like a judge gives their reasons in their
Which is critical. Well, thank you for bringing that, because part of your job when you're sitting in that role, in the quasi judicial role, is you've got to give that interpretation, right? You've got to give reasons why you're either supporting or denying the application, and that's the important part of it. And that's what's going to be used to determine if it ever does get challenged. What was the rationale behind the decision? You just can't say, well, it doesn't meet the criteria, so we're voting no. You got to say exactly why it's not meeting. What is our interpretation of the law? Yes. And I think in this case, in my example, the answer was they didn't find a compelling reason why to say no. And that business to this day is still in downtown, on the downtown corridor. It's still there, 40 years later. College kids love it. I think it's great. So those are some of the challenges you're facing, that sometimes you may have to be in a position where it may not be politically popular, but I'm honoring the constitutional right of this individual who, and so those are the things that makes it challenging. And so sometimes we want to lean on the side. It's like, well, I want to keep these folks happy. But if we don't follow the right process and don't have sufficient findings, then it can be reversed, go through a lot of expense, and then you end up having to have it anyway at a great expense to the taxpayer. So trying to figure out where's that balance and where's your discretion in that process.
I was going to say, one example you could take from Billings to share around is car washes. I feel like we get so many applications. I've seen so many for car washes. And constantly people are like, I don't want a car wash here.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at the criteria, you have to explain to people like, well, I don't get to choose what they do with their land. If they're meeting all of these guidelines, we don't have to love that there's a million car washes around, but that's why they exist. So anyway, it's a local one we see a lot.
Thank you. That's a great one. And I would add to that and say, well, okay, if we're having problems with that, let's go back to the policy, right? Let's go back and revisit the policy. If we're having some pushback on all this, then is there something about the policy we've created that we can tighten that up, right? And so we're not victims to that. And this is the thing when Board of Adjustments, in the city I was the mayor of, we had, I can't remember ever a time where the Board of Adjustments denied a request for a variance. Particularly, for example, was the one that happened all the time was setback rules for decks. Decks had become like an extension of the house. We had small houses built, 1,200, 1,300 square foot homes with small lots. And so people are big, and we have lots of expectations of life and lifestyle. And so they're building these decks off the back of their homes to extend their family living space. But it was hitting and encroaching upon the setbacks. And so we're always coming in and having to do variances to setbacks for decks. And it's like, well, why don't we just change the policy? Why don't we have the policy reflect where we are today? Because that policy was adopted back in the 60s, and it had a specific reason why they wanted to do that. But maybe our values as a community have changed, so should we update our policy to reflect that change so we don't have to keep giving permission to people to break the law, change the law? Right? That's at your discretion. So just be thinking about some of those things. If we keep having these repeat things coming up, it's like, so let's go back and look at the policy that's creating this friction in our community. That experiment no longer is working. We're not getting the outcomes that we used to, so let's reevaluate the experiment and hope to get a different outcome.
I want to bring something up that you mentioned real quick. You mentioned rebuttal when you got a developer coming and you've got the public comment come in and they kind of say what they say. The developer will typically come in and they're given more time than the individual, but they're one entity given that their testimony or their side of the things. But there is no real rebuttal. I mean, often you see a developer will answer some of the questions that the public had, but you never see the ability for then the public to come back and rebuttal again. So are we not following the process in making sure there's equal time as far as giving their testimony and then rebuttaling each other's answers, or is that just the way the process works?
Yeah, I think that is a common concern that I hear across the state. So my assumption is the system is designed, it's set up that way, which may be a broader conversation with the legislature to rethink the process.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but it's a common refrain. There was a thought that I had from another metro community that's, anyway, I lost it. Something from Great Falls was doing something I thought was kind of innovative and I can't remember what it was now. Anyway, I think we've gotten through. So this handout, I think, in the blue squares here, it kind of gives you a sense of what's administrative, what's legislative, and what's executive functions, which are different. And then on the back, it gives you some, kind of do's and don'ts. And it just gives you an idea. So as and I don't know how often, if it's like once every meeting, you might have a hearing on some sort of land. I don't know if you're at that pace, or every couple of months you might have a hearing. Just refer to this information and think about, refresh your memory so you don't end up inadvertently stepping beyond your scope in this role and inviting a pushback from either the public or a developer because you didn't do something right. And I think it's the hardest thing for the public to recognize that when you're in the quasi-judicial role, you're not in that legislative role. You're not soliciting that input. And they often have strong feelings and opinions about it. And they're going to want to approach you in the grocery store or wherever else and want to talk about it. And you've got to come up with language and a script that you can almost recite to them saying, hey, the time to talk about that is during the public hearing because everyone needs to hear that, not just my fellow commissioners or council members, but everyone needs to hear it. It's an important part of the conversation. And so you really need to come and do that. And if you can't, can you send an email? Then send it to the staff and they'll get it, make sure it gets into the record. We want to get that input, but I don't want to be the only one that has it and then have to come to this meeting and try to relay your sentiments to the rest of the group and disclose my ex parte communication. If you want to rely on me to carry your water for you, you're going to be sorely disappointed. So please come, right? So that's a way to limit that. Limit that participation that way. So, but again, the public doesn't always recognize that. They think, well, why, they just always see you in that legislator role and they don't appreciate it when you just jump that little bit and wear that other hat. So trying to help manage those expectations is going to be helpful. Another thought that I lost.
On that.
Go ahead.
So if a council member gets an email from constituent on a quasi-judicial matter, and it only just comes to to me, should I forward that on to our city attorney or?
My suggestion, but I will defer if you have a different policy, I would send that to staff, to the relevant staff, so they can have it, they can keep record of it, and then they can distribute it appropriately. Yeah. I will say, here's another thing just about social media, and we expect you, when you're in this QJ role, to be fair in looking at the process, right? And what I mean by that is I don't want you to make decisions or make up your mind ahead of time. And this is the challenge we have right now with our era of social media. I strongly encourage you to be very careful. Don't jump out there on social media and say something like, this development will never happen over my dead body, not while I'm on council. You can guarantee that it's not happening, right? What you've done is you've demonstrated publicly that my mind is closed before I've even seen the evidence. And that's the fastest way for you to get conflicted and be removed from the decision-making process. You'll have a conversation with the attorney and say, hey, when that comes up, you've got to sit down in the gallery because you have demonstrated your mind is closed and that you're not open to hearing the evidence that's presented during the hearing because you've already declared your stance on that ahead of time. We've had county commissioners, not in this county, let me think, not in this county that I can think of, but they, before getting elected, say, you vote me in and I will make sure that that thing does not happen. and they got voted in, and it comes time to make decisions, they said, sorry, you've got to sit this one out because you have showed that your mind is closed and not willing to listen to the evidence. You're not giving a fair hearing to the applicant. And so just be careful how you engage in your political speech may have an impact on when you're in this. You can have that conversation, not over my dead body, are we going to have a chicken ordinance here? That's fine. But over my dead body, we're not going to allow that business to go in. That's a different context, and that's going to get you in trouble. I haven't got the hook yet. Oh, 7:05.
Let me
Okay,
say
didn't
that
stink eye.
there's impermissible bias, that a court may reverse something. The difference between impermissible bias and permissible bias is a very, very gray area right there. So there is no really hard and fast rule necessarily, but yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, be careful. Just be very careful that you're not showing that my mind is closed to this issue and that before even hearing the evidence, right? Just like a judge isn't going to go out in the newspaper and declare that person's guilty before the trial has started. There's not a fair hearing on that. Yeah. Okay, my time is up.
Mayor, if I can, so I've had the privilege and listening to Dan give information to new council members, new commissioners. He has courses that go on for days and valuable information. I'm glad you kind of got a taste of what he can provide and how we can do it. He facilitates conversations when things get heated within government bodies. He can be brought in. I just wanted, especially for us, to experience him and some of the information he has, because he does open up and facilitate conversation with us that sometimes it's tough to have because we don't necessarily have all the answers all the time. We have to ask a question. Sometimes we're doing it to get you to engage us in a conversation, but he does that. He can talk to us about open meeting laws, procedure and process, public comment. He does board training, staff trainings. I think he's just a valuable resource. So as we get into our roles and doing this, there's opportunities for us to rely on him to come into our community and help us facilitate a lot of needed conversations for sure.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, happy to help however we can. And
Thanks, Mr. Clark.
given the time we've got.
Thank you. Appreciate it. This was riveting, edge of the seat kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. Love it. Well, I'll tell you this, if you're not having fun doing this, you're not doing it right. So thank you, Mayor.
I think we
Thanks.
also need to thank MSU for providing this service. That's really useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, with that, we're going to move up to highlight upcoming agenda items of council interest. Anything, Mr. Kukulski?
Well, as I mentioned before, so budget process internally is starting. It's a few months before you'll start to see it. A week from today, regular meeting, fairly light agenda as we have been putting more things through work sessions before they come to you in regular meetings. So I think as we work into the future, that may be a conversation for us to have. We're kind of stacking up with thick work sessions, and then the regular meetings are consent agenda with 1 or 2 items. So, but some of it too is just the reality of holidays were just 6 weeks ago, 6 brand new people, and focusing on orientation and some other things. So next week, relatively light. Leave it at that.
All right, thanks. Any council discussion? That was riveting too. Thank you. We're going to move on to public comment on non-agenda items. Oh, there are people out there. So come on up, state your name and where you live, and take your 3 minutes. Could you speak a little, I think.
Miss Thomas Stachef. I live at 4168 Bruce Avenue. I love the chicken story.
Yeah, I did too.
And my only point would be, I don't care if this whole room is standing room only, full of crazed activists, you can still say no, okay? It's a big city. Just because this room is full people that want something that's self-satisfying doesn't mean you have to cave to them. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other public comment? Well, seeing none, we are adjourned.